folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to do a quick intro because I don't have too much to say other than if you're in the New York City area, me and my friend Sam Z will be doing workshop shows of our one-man shows, storytelling comedy shows in February. February 11th and 18th, we'll be at Pete's Candy Store in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. And then on February 15th, we'll be at Branded Saloon in Prospect Heights at Brooklyn. I will have the links for those in the description, so make sure if you're in the area, I would love to see you. On the show today, I'm recording this from the Earwolf offices in New York City. On the show today, Lex Friedman, the host of the Wolf Den podcast. Lex also works here at Earwolf, and I was lucky enough to get sit down and talk to him for about an hour, and it was a really great, informative conversation. I learned a lot about his past history in performance and in comedy before he got to Earwolf. And if you are a podcaster and you're looking to grow your show and you're looking for advice on how to do a podcast, if you're new, or if you're trying to take your podcast to the next level, I feel like there's a lot of very practical, useful information. And it was also great to just kind of share some common interests in music and in comedy. So it was a really fun conversation. So I thank you guys very much for tuning in. If you enjoy this podcast, please feel free to tell a friend. If we are on Apple and Stitcher, if you want to give us a rating or a review on iTunes, or if you want to add the show to your favorites list on Stitcher, that helps grow the show, and I appreciate it personally. So thank you guys again very much. You can follow me on Twitter at Comic Will Carey, and you can listen to The Wolf Den on Stitcher and iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. So let us go to my chat with Lex Friedman. Yeah, well, the way I approached podcasting when I started doing it was the same way like I approach bands. I'm like, oh, my favorite band is Blink-182. What guitar does he use? I'm like, oh, well, I'll get that mic and I'll get that recorder, because I feel like there's a certain je ne sais quoi to like the portable, like the Zoom H4n.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this an ad for the Zoom?
No, but I wish they would sponsor me. I think because I don't know how many people would be podcasting if it wasn't for this little thing.
Oh, yeah. I think that the studios here have some too.
Yeah. I also have a theory. There's one right here. I also have a theory that so there are a lot of podcasts that exist about movies so that people can go to the movies with their friends.
And feel like they're doing work while doing so.
Yeah.
I know that we had a comedian who's still in our network on the Earwolf side who for years has thought about making a video game podcast so he could feel less guilty about the time he spends playing video games. So I think you're onto something.
Yeah, I know, right? Like if I routinely think I should start like a side anime podcast so that I can be like, no, I have to. It's for work.
This is important.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about your trip. You were in Israel over the holidays?
Yes.
How was that?
It was good. I have two sisters. One lives in LA and the other lives in Israel. So she went to college in Massachusetts for a couple of years, dropped out, moved to Israel. Met the man who became her husband. They moved back to the U.S. at his request. And then he's like, after a decade or so in the U.S., he's like, I'm ready to go back home to Israel now. So they live there. She has 5 kids. It was one of her son's bar mitzvahs over the Christmas break. So we went there, and I had been there many times. My family had not. So we did the bar mitzvah, and then we did like jam-packed sightseeing packed into a week in Israel.
And were you in Tel Aviv or were you in like more remote place?
We were everywhere.
Wow.
We were in Tel Aviv briefly. We were in Jerusalem a couple days, and then we were in Caesarea and all in and around Jerusalem. And we went to Masada and the Dead Sea. So we covered the whole country.
And you've been there a couple of times. So is there like an emotional resonance for you when you go to Israel?
I feel guilty saying no, but the true answer is no. I feel guilty or lying. But so no, for me when I was growing up, I was very observantly Jewish, and I loved going to Israel in large part for the food. Like I could go to any restaurant and order the food instead of having to pick a kosher restaurant specifically. So I would go to Israel and eat KFC, and that would be exciting to me. Now I'm not kosher anyway. So
Right.
that part's gone. It was more, to me, it was like getting to see the family that I don't see so often because they're there, and then also getting to show my kids stuff that they hadn't seen. So that part resonated with me, but there wasn't like a spiritual connection for me.
Oh yeah, I understand completely, because like the first time I was anywhere close to the Middle East, it was like completely foreign and exciting. I think the first time I went to the Middle East was Istanbul. I was in Turkey, and you're hearing the call to prayer every couple of hours. It was, again, nothing I could compare it to. So that's got to be, and I imagine giving your kids that's got to be, it'll open their eyes like early on, which I think is good.
The fascinating thing to me was when we got to Jerusalem, the first full day we were there was Christmas Day. And the first thing we saw there was Santa Claus. There was some guy dressed up as Santa Claus sitting on the back of a pickup truck, and everybody wanted pictures of Santa Claus because he was a funny sight in the middle of Jerusalem.
Oh, I could imagine. I could imagine. So, that's funny.
It's pretty good.
So what is Israel like on Christmas other than Santa Claus? Is it drastically different?
No, it is the same. It's just another day. It's pretty much the same way they treat like New Year's, where it's just not a thing. So all the stores are open. There's obviously people who celebrate there, but it's not a day off from work, and it's just looks like business as usual there from my perspective.
And you grew up in the States? Where?
I grew up in Pennsylvania.
You grew up in Pennsylvania. What part?
Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, which is outside Reading, which is outside Philadelphia.
So kind of more suburban, like a suburb of
very much
of Philadelphia.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I grew up about an hour and a half outside of DC, but like completely remote. Like if I wanted to go to a friend's house, it was like a 20-minute drive. So I spent a lot of time by myself, just with my imagination and my PlayStation.
Right. Two fun things, and I think two things that help you on the path to becoming a podcaster, right?
Oh, I think so. I talk about this with lots of people, like the important side of not having a lot to do or anywhere to go is important for growing your imagination.
Yes. It's the scariest thing about iPhones to me, or iPads, like, because my kids want to use those, and they're only allowed certain time on the weekends, but they see their parents, me and their mom, using them all the time, and it's it eliminates
especially
some imagination time.
Yeah, especially for the business, where I imagine for your job, you're having to be available nearly almost constantly.
Yes, I try to be disciplined about it, but I am not.
So you grew up outside. So you're growing up outside Pennsylvania. You said you have two sisters.
I have two older sisters.
And what did your folks do?
My father was an orthopedic surgeon, and my mom was the office manager in his office.
Oh, wow. And is that how they met, or did they start the practice?
They started the practice years after they had been married. I don't know why that was always her choice, but because she had other jobs before them, but at some point she decided she was going to be the office manager at his office, and in one prior practice, and then when he went into private practice.
Well, that sounds kind of nice, though.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, like, the couple that like open a restaurant together. Yes. That kind of thing. And was your family like a creative household when you were growing up? Like, what kind of kid were you?
I was a creative kid. I don't know. I mean, both my sisters like to do theater, and both my sisters like to sing. And my mom really does not like any of those things. My mom doesn't even like music to be heard. Like, she finds it noise, and so she doesn't sing. She doesn't like to listen to music. She does like shows, right? She'd like to see a play or a musical that she'd be into, but she would not listen to the soundtrack afterwards.
Interesting.
But so I would think that my house, I was the class clown of my house.
Right.
And we consumed television especially pretty healthily. Like, it wasn't, there are houses where the TV's on all the time. It wasn't that. But we were like primetime watchers. 8 to 10 or 8 to 11, we would watch what was on TV, and we had the specific shows, because it was pre-TiVo and pre-DVRing.
Right.
We had the shows that we would watch, and so it would be the sitcoms, usually until 10 o'clock, and then a drama at 10. And we took those seriously. If we watched a show, we watched it religiously.
Yeah. And what were those? What were the shows that really stuck with you?
My dad really loved Home Improvement. I loved the transitions on Home Improvement, and like the in-show gags. Like, they would do a lot of crazy swipes and stuff. And then I loved all the goofier things they would do to make sure that Wilson's face was obscured. I like that. My dad also really loved Coach. That one I was never as into. Roseanne was a popular show with us at that time. I did not watch the revival.
Oh yeah, I didn't watch the revival either. I don't think I was allowed to watch Roseanne when I was a kid. I think I think she said, "Hell, will you get the hell out of my house?" in one promo, and my mom was like, "No." My mom also wouldn't let me watch The Simpsons.
Oh, I did. We did watch The Simpsons. That was a good one for me and my dad. I remember there was an episode of Roseanne where I think it was Becky. The term they were using was that she had cut the cheese at school, and none of us could figure out what it meant. And eventually one person in the family, I don't even remember who it was not me, figured it out and then was embarrassed to explain it to the rest of us. So it was a very strict household, but with entertainment we were kind of just allowed to watch the stuff we wanted to watch. But it was a lot of TV, and then I just always loved especially comedy music or nerdy music in general, and anything that was comedy focused I was into.
Nice. So I know this kind of goes into some of the premium offerings on on the Earwolf and Stitcher premium platform. So were you by any chance like so comedy music? So like, are we talking like early Weird Al or like Dr. Demento?
All of the above. So I was early Weird Al.
Like what era of Weird Al is this?
So I was
like
born in 1980.
1980. Okay. Okay. So
I
you're not too much older than me.
Introduced to Al around the time I was 7 or 8, and so for me the first big thing was Fat. So I wasn't conscious enough for Eat It, but I was very aware for Fat. And I thought that whole situation was hilarious. The fat suit and the video and the song and how closely it sounded like the original song. And then I had to devour everything. And for me, I'm a completist. If I'm going to watch a TV show, I'm going to watch every episode. I'm going to listen to an artist, I'm going to get every album.
Yeah.
And once I realized I liked Al, I had to get every Al album. And then once I did that, I had to get more comedy albums because I loved the idea of comedy music, because a lot of comedy is not meant to be repeated, right? Like you can't. Some people, you might rewatch a stand-up special, you might rewatch a favorite movie, but like you don't do it all the time. But music you listen to over and over again.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, just thinking about how kind of disposable stand-up comedy or like comedy in general can be. Like thinking about like the biggest stars from like the 50s. Or somebody like Lenny Bruce. Like Lenny Bruce is like one of the biggest comedians of that era. I'm also thinking about it because I just got into watching Mrs. Maisel.
Got it.
He's like the biggest, most important comic of that time.
Yep.
But when I would listen to Lenny Bruce now, I think I'm too far removed from the era to appreciate really how important it was.
Yes.
Or even someone like Bill Hicks. Like if you hear too many of the spawn or like poor imitators of Bill Hicks,
right?
It loses some of the impact of just how important his stuff was when he was doing it.
What's interesting to me is with SNL, which is another thing that was a big thing in my household.
Oh yeah.
Old Weekend Updates often hold up very well, and I think that's interesting. Like the jokes are topical, but it's really the joke topics are topical, and the jokes themselves are evergreen in a way that even if you don't have the full context for the story, it's funny. And I'm impressed because I agree with you. I think a lot of comedy is ephemeral. I think a lot of stand-up, I think that's one of the reasons that so many comedians want to record albums and they want to have their specials. Obviously, they also get paid for those things, and that's appealing too.
Oh yeah, of course.
But it's like, let me have a time capsule of this thing. But it's once its moment has passed, I don't think you have the same culture today of people like, I know it's a rough example, but listening to old Bill Cosby albums and being able to do them by heart, that's not a thing anymore. People mostly can't do. And I think even in the 90s, some people could quote large swaths of a Chris Rock routine. But today, I don't think people are quoting a Seinfeld routine other than as parody. And I think that's interesting. It's just because there's so much and it's so readily available.
Yeah, and when you get a certain distance from it, Seinfeld becomes less like an important comedian and more just like this like pop culture zeitgeist where it's like written about and studied almost by like I feel mostly younger people is when it comes up. But I am inclined to agree with you because I remember when I started doing stand-up and was just really getting excited and consuming as much as I possibly could because I was really into it. Like I was listening to old Richard Pryor and George Carlin and connecting with like the craft of it, even if I didn't understand everything that he was talking about. But yeah, I don't feel like that's happening. Like that happens now. And like so many of my comedian friends are afraid of like accidentally like absorbing something and repeating it and being accused of stealing. And again, there's a more academic approach to a lot of comedy now, which I don't think does it any favors.
I know what you mean. Conan O'Brien started doing a podcast recently, and we asked, hey, should we send over? It's fantastic. We asked, should we send over some ad reads from other comedians so we can hear what it's like? And he's like, please don't. Like, I don't want to imitate anybody. And he listens to podcasts, but he's like, I don't want to have ad reads to study because I want to do my own thing and not feel like I'm ripping anybody off. And I totally understand that, of wanting to be original. It's a lot of comedy right now feels like it's meta or meta adjacent. And I like meta. Too much of it is a bad thing. There's a comedian who I love. I went to college with him, Mike Kaplan, MYQ Kaplan.
Oh, yeah. I like Mike.
And Mike texts me like 10 times a year to say like Happy New Year, Happy Birthday, or I'm thinking like, and he's just a sweet guy. Many of his jokes to me, even if they're not explicitly, are also about the mechanics of joke making and about what our expectations are with the joke. And I like that more than I like, a comedian who comes up and is like, I even liked Ellen DeGeneres' recent new special on Netflix, Relatable, where it's a comedian who is saying, I'm going to have my style and I'm going to make the jokes that make sense to me versus I know what your expectations are in this dynamic. So let me customize my act since we both know what a stand-up is. Like, just, you know what I mean? There's a version of playing at it versus being it. And I prefer the latter versus the playing at the mechanics of I am a comedian doing my comedy now.
Mm-hmm. You just prefer the like, I'm a comedian.
Yes, just be funny. Just do it.
Yeah. Have you seen Bert Kreischer's recent stand-up special?
I have not.
It's very good. He is what I would describe as like a perfect like Crusher Club comedian.
Okay.
Like he is the guy that is going to absolutely destroy like late show Friday night. You're gonna have a great time and you're gonna drink more than just the 2 drinks at the club and you're gonna have a blast. His show, and I would not say like I've been doing stand-up for, I think this will be my 12th year.
Wow.
In October. And when I started, I don't know if I would have given him the time of day because I was like, oh no, comedy is art and alternative and Patton Oswalt and Mitch Hedberg and all that.
Sure.
Into those kinds of stuff. But there is a craft and skill to like being basically the like center of attention and just like riding these huge waves of laughter. Yes. And I think he does that really well. So I love that. I would suggest that. Were you into stand up at all when you were younger?
I mean, I love stand up on Comedy Central.
Like the Comedy Central
Network at the time. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Stand up was a show where it was an MTV version of stand up where it would just be like bits and then it would just go from like a couple minutes of one person's set and then it would just, now here's a couple minutes of another person's set, just back to back to back to back. And I just loved it. I was never an expert in stand-up, but I always have watched it. I would say more recently, like Netflix's resurgence in stand-up has been beneficial to me because I'm married. My wife has absolutely no interest in watching a stand-up special, but the fact that I can watch it on the bus or on my iPad or whatever is a big deal to me.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna go through all those stand-ups of the world they just put out. I'm gonna watch all of those. That's gonna be like my project for the year.
Good.
Yeah, those specials were so important for me. Like just seeing what stand-up is.
Yes.
Because I didn't really know what it was. To me, I think stand-up. I had seen, going back to Bill Cosby, I had seen himself when I was in 5th grade, and enjoyed that. And then I had also. I'm from a kind of southern part of Maryland, so like Jeff Foxworthy.
Sure.
I had heard albums of his, but I had never watched someone do stand-up. So those Comedy Central presents were really important. I remember Greg Barron's. I remember Carlos Mencias.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that one, not remembering
over and over again.
Yeah. Jim David was another really good one. I want to meet him. Because I think about one of his jokes from his Comedy Central special from like the early 2000s or 90s, like frequently, because it's just such a good joke. And I think that was the first time I'd ever seen a gay comedian. So
there was a stand-up I saw, and I don't know who it is. I bet it's Googleable, although I haven't, with a routine that has stuck with me ever since. Anytime I hear a car alarm, and he talked about how he thought the car alarms were like a song. And I remember watching on Comedy Central and be like, it sounds like it's the car talking to you. It's like, hello.
I know who that is.
I'm a car. Tell me.
That's Dane Cook.
Was it really Dane Cook?
That's early Dane Cook. That's like
hilarious.
Harmful If Swallowed area.
Wow. I had no idea.
Dane Cook. Yeah.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah, his
I
early
love that bit somehow.
That bit is so good. His first album is so good. It has like so many good bits. Like I know people like hated on him for a while, but he's a solid. He was a solid comic. Let's see. So you're aware of stand up. You're a creative person, and you say you were raised in a strict household. Were you raised in like a very religious household?
It was fairly observant, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We were kosher, and we went to synagogue every Friday and Saturday, and often a couple more times than that during the week.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just, my parents were strict. We had like enforced bedtimes, and we had, they were big on corporal punishment, and you had to get certain grades.
Mm-hmm.
If you came home without A's, there would be all kinds of problems. You had to study with them for tests and stuff. It was an interesting house.
So they were invested in your academic success.
Yes, they just wanted you to be a good reflection of them. They wanted to be able to crow about you. They still do.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I feel like I had that to a certain degree. I never felt it so much, but I definitely know that I would get chewed out for like a low grade on a test or something like that, because I hit a certain point in high school where if I wasn't interested in something, I was not willing to put in any extra effort.
Yeah,
I was just putting in all the effort on the things that I wanted to do. So what was when you were in high school, what was the dream? Was there a career path you had at that point?
I always wanted to write for SNL.
Always wanted to write for SNL.
Yes. And so in high school, I mean, there are people who fall in love with SNL from, a certain time in their youth. I love all SNL. There are people who are like, well, this season's lousy. I always like it. I like that they put on a show each week. I like how they approach it. I like that the show constantly changes. And what used to be, it still kills me that they stopped doing mostly TV show parodies. I would like them to bring that back. I really enjoyed that era of SNL, and they almost never do it these days. When I was in college, I wrote a postcard every day that I started. I'm ashamed to admit that I started with Jay Leno, but I wrote a postcard to him every day when his show was on saying, here are jokes you could have added to the monologue. And I did a postcard because it was, if you remember, there was 9/11, and then after 9/11, there was the anthrax thing. And so I thought if I put it a letter that they would be nervous about opening mail. So I just did a postcard so there couldn't be anything harmful. So I'd send a postcard every day with, here are some jokes. And I would do this every night after I watched his monologue. And
that's a good writing exercise.
Information on the back. And months go by. And then one day I have an answering machine, and then there's a message on my answering machine that's so-and-so from Jay Leno's office. And I'm like, well, it's working. Everything's coming up Friedman. And so I call, and a woman answers on the first ring, and she's like, Jay can't accept joke submissions. I'm like, no, I know. I'm not saying use these jokes. I'm saying hire me because look at my ability to write jokes. And she's like, well, he's had no turnover on his writing staff in 17 years, so he's not really looking. And I'm like, oh. And that was it. Then I started writing letters to Conan, who also didn't respond. It took many years for me to get Conan. I helped name his podcast, so I feel like now I wrote for Conan a little bit.
Yes,
but
and it's a great title.
It is.
It says everything you need to know.
But yeah, that was the dream, was writing for SNL or for a late night show.
So comedy writing specifically, not stand up or performance, but comedy writing.
I love performance. I'm in an improv group right now.
Oh, nice.
I've done improv for years. I never did stand up. I did comedy shows. I hosted a radio show in college every week. First it was 12 to 1 a.m., then it was 12 to 2 a.m., then it was 12 to 3 a.m., and I was like, no, we're going back to 12 to 1 a.m. 12 to 3 a.m. is ridiculous. And so my co-host on that show and I would perform live, often doing funny songs, and we would improvise songs about folks. So it was stand-up-esque, but I never thought of it as that way. I thought it was just as performing.
Gotcha.
But I wouldn't have minded if SNL was like, hey, you're so funny, you should also be on it. But like the dream was, the one that felt attainable was writing.
Yeah.
SNL.
Yeah. I feel like that's not too far off, because like most of the stand-ups I know at least get hired for writing and then make their way onto a show. I think that's what happened with Mulaney, who is one of my favorite comedians.
He's amazing.
He is so good. So writing for, I think that's very nice that someone from the Tonight Show took the time to call you and just be like, hey, I don't know if this is gonna work.
I appreciated the call. They had stacks and stacks of Lex postcards by that point. And I imagine it just it can't be that annoying, even if you don't want it, to just throw them away each day. So I think that it was beyond just annoying them to like, hey, this guy's trying, we'll at least reach back out. We'll tell them if they really like. It was clear to me that I was trying to apply. I said like, you can hire me and whatever. But I think it was nice that they reached out. And then later, when Jimmy Fallon took over the Tonight Show. No, I guess when Jimmy Fallon took over just Conan's old show.
Late night?
Right, which he did twice, I guess. But
I guess he did.
But when he took over late night, I started a website called HireMeJimmyFallon.com. And it was the same thing, where I would post jokes every single day that he could have done, and I would just like tweet it at him and tweet it at other writers on the show, and that never went anywhere.
Yeah, I
It's not the right way to get a job ready for late night, by the way. I did not follow the correct path.
Yeah, that's kind of like that's the kind of thing that sounds like it should work for this day and age, but I don't. But otherwise, there would be just a million hire me. There would be like hire me Jimmy Fallon 42.
Right.
At Twitter.
I was the only one that I knew of at the time, and I don't know. I love late night monologues. I love that whole format.
Oh yeah, there's something I love just a perfectly crafted setup punch twist kind of joke.
Yes.
Yeah. And I have like comedian friends who like write for shows, and I'm always like, who's asking you to put the package together? Because I know that it's not like because like my fiance kind of, I think she approaches it the way she does her jobs, where it's like, oh, you ask people to get coffee on LinkedIn, and then that's how you find out where the jobs are, and then there's a website. And I'm like, not really.
Right. Not the same.
It's a lot of like handshaking and like, oh, just I know that person's funny, so I'll let them know when this thing comes up. So did you go to like school for creative writing then?
So if I had to do it over again, I would have majored in creative writing. I've always written. And when I went to Brandeis, I majored in linguistics and cognitive science, and I took a creative writing class, and it was one of my favorite things that I did in school. And I found out that to be the creative writing major, to be in that major, you had to have applied while applying to the school. And that completely missed my radar. And the professor was like, we're going to find a way to get you into this. I'm like, well, no, now I'm a linguistics major. Like, I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah.
Which was dumb. But I did some writing there. I loved that class. And then I moved to LA after college and started classes at the Groundlings.
Oh, nice. So you were in LA what year was this?
I moved to LA in 2002, and I left LA in 2006.
So 4 years. Tell me about your experience with the Groundlings. I know that's so like one of the meccas for improv comedy.
To me, that was my path to SNL. I loved it so much. And I don't know. Are you familiar? Have you done any of the improv schools?
I've never taken improv classes, but I've done it. I went to school for theater, but I've never studied under the big schools.
So at the Groundling School, you have to pass each level to be able to move on to the next level. And of course, you're paying for all these classes. And I passed the first level, and I was like so happy. And they're like, "Oh, of course you're going to pass. You meet with the teacher one-on-one when you get your thing." He's like, "You're built for this. You're going to be great." Yeah. I was like, "Oh, thank you." And then the second class, and then the third class, I didn't just fail, and you can retake at certain levels. I didn't just fail the third class.
Yeah.
The teacher, and it is a comedian who you would know by name, so I won't identify her.
Okay.
But the teacher goes, you have to have funny. And Lex, you just aren't funny. So like, even if you have the skills to do improv, you're not a funny person. So this won't work for you. And I was so offended. Like, I took it politely. I was like, oh, well, thanks for letting me know, I guess. Then I retook it, and I told the teacher who I had to retake that class, this is my feedback. And he happened to also have been my first teacher at the Groundlings. A guy named David John, who is hilarious and talented, and Jahn. And David was like, I don't understand why she told you this, and just ignore it, and and so it hit my confidence, right? And I was struggling a little bit. I did pass that class the second time, and he's like, everybody else in the class looks to you as a leader, and I was like, I had no idea that was the case, but that's great. So I got my confidence back. Finally, passed the last level you could do before you take the writing class there, and the writing class had a year-long waiting list, and I was like, I'll put my name on. So I called a year later, like, we only have one teacher who we're willing to have teach that class right now, and there's still no room. Try again in another year. In the meantime. Decided we were going to have kids, and decided we were going to move to the East Coast. The day after we moved to New Jersey, my cell phone rang, and I was like, we have a spot open for you. And my wife was like 6 months pregnant. And the question was, and we had no money, Like,
Right.
could I leave my wife to go sublet an apartment in LA that we couldn't afford for a couple months so I could take another Groundlings class? And I decided that didn't make sense. So I just abandoned it then.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to do that class. And then the next step is you audition for the Sunday company, and you can be cut at any time for any of these things. Then if you do well in the Sunday company, you can join the main company. Like,
Right.
when I was there, I had seen Kristen Wiig on the Joe Schmo show, and she was a Groundling, and she was there when I was taking classes. I would see her every once in a while. She subtaught a class for me one time.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like fanboying her just from the Joe Schmo show, which I don't know if you watched, but I recommend to everybody who likes improv comedy.
Okay, I'll take a
It
look.
was a fake game show that had 2 seasons on Spike, and the first season it was like a Survivor or the one in the house,
Big Brother.
Big Brother style show, where everybody's an improv actor except for one person who thinks that he's a contestant on a real show. And so she was Dr. Pat on the Joe Schmo show. She was like a psychologist, and they have to, like, they know what they want to do each day, and they're meeting, huddling with the producers in secret each day, but like and they have to keep the actor fooled, the real guy fooled the whole time. Anyway, it's great. But so I love that whole thing, and I regret that I never got to finish that school because I don't know what would happen there. Probably nothing.
Right.
But I regret not having done it.
There's got to be some kind of writing class that you can take in New York, because I feel I can, or I feel like there's a podcast. I know you have a popular podcast on Earwolf right now, but I feel like there's a Lex's late night talk show podcast.
Right now, it's just my life. I just make these jokes whenever they occur to me now. But joining an improv group, which I only did, I auditioned for an improv troupe in Jersey, in Parley, New Jersey, called Death by Improv, probably now 4 or 5 months ago. And so we do workshops every week and then shows once a month. And this was 5 months ago. And that's been a really nice creative outlet for me. So
great.
I'm glad I found that. I didn't do it here in New York because I live in Jersey. And
What part of Jersey?
Central Jersey in Monmouth County in a town called Manalapan. And
Oh, wow. So you have a heck of a commute every day.
I take a 7:01 bus that typically gets to Port Authority around 8:20. But so since I have 3 kids, like, minimizing the amount of time that I'm in the city is a goal.
Yeah. No, yeah, that makes perfect sense, because my fiance's brother has 2 kids. They live in Hammond, just outside Philadelphia. And,
Oh, wow.
And I'm just, wrangling 2 kids in suburbia seems like a challenge when you have like a house, but just the idea of like 3 kids in New York City, I'm just like, all right, I'll swipe your MetroCards, kids.
I'm scared of the subway. I'm not taking my kids on the subway.
It's not good right now. Hopefully it's going to get
Well, now
fixed.
they don't have to shut down the L train or whatever it was.
Yeah, I have a comedy writer friend. She's hilarious. She's
in the right business.
She was living in Williamsburg, then she moved to Long Island City to avoid the L train shutdown. But now the L train shutdown's not happening, and Amazon is moving into Long Island City, so she just got smacked around both ways. New York can get.
I think the key lessons are never move, and For years, I would have said I could never live in New York City. Now I think I could probably live in New York City. I just think I'm not built for it. I think I would need like a perfect guide. Like, I would have to live with somebody who absolutely loved the city.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. My fiance's born and raised, so that's helpful. What's also nice is we're in Astoria, which I feel is it's still New York City, but it is not like Midtown Manhattan. It's not like you walk out and it's immediately smacking you in the face.
Yeah.
So now I'm kind of curious of tracing your route into podcasting.
Please.
Here. I'm trying to think. So podcasts become are invented, like, I think maybe like mid 2000s, like mid aughts,
something like that.
Is what I remember. I remember listening to Smodcast after college. That was the first podcast I listened to before I discovered WTF. How did you find podcasting and start working in it? Did you ever like work in radio? Or
I worked on my college radio station. But for me, basically, I was nerdy. So I worked at a series of internet startup companies, and then after a couple successes there, I took a job as a full-time writer, not even writing comedy, just writing for Macworld, writing for a technology publication. So it was a magazine and a website. It's still a website, but writing about Macs and iPhones and iPads and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so years prior, when I was still in LA, I heard of podcasting, and so I launched a podcast with a friend. I don't know exactly how I heard of it, but I launched a show with a friend. He was in Boston. He was a guy I had done tons of improv with. And so we would do a weekly podcast that literally single-digit people listened to. I know my dad listened to it.
Yeah,
and we would typically make jokes about the news and sing silly songs to each other, and it was all ridiculous. But when I got into it all over again, I basically, like I said, I'd been working at these internet companies, and they were 24-hour day jobs.
Yeah.
Even more so than this one is. It was how this one was when I first started.
Right.
And I finally, when I had that job at Macworld where it wasn't a full 24-hour a day job, it was just like a regular day job, I had free time. So when a friend was like, hey, do you want to start a podcast with me? I was like, okay. And this was years after, right? I think probably the first podcast I was really aware of was a show called The Talk Show, which is hosted by an Apple blogger named John Gruber. And that one is now like often 3 hours long, and it's still just him and one guest talking about whatever happened in Apple technology news that week. But so when his friends,
kind of dry.
Exactly. And when his friends like, hey, do you want to start a podcast with me? We were another two white guys. We thought we could talk about technology.
Right.
But I was still full-time employed by Macworld. And when my boss heard about that show, he's like, you can't, I asked him like, hey, can I do this? And he's like, you can't really do a podcast about technology because we might decide to do podcasts at Macworld, and that would be competitive. You can do anything else. And so I went back to my co-host. I was like, we've taped 4 or 5 pilots with tech people.
Right.
But now we can't talk about tech. So let's talk to tech people about anything that's not tech. And that'll be the show.
Yeah.
And so the show became unprofessional, with the idea being we would talk to you about anything other than your day job. And it started out with just like Apple technology people. So you'd bring on a developer who would talk about, their favorite sandwich or whatever the hell it was. And eventually we started getting sort of celebrity guests. The actor Josh Malina from like West Wing and Scandal and now on The Big Bang Theory, he came on the show and talked about geocaching, which I did not know about till that point. We had like the way I eventually got Jonathan Colton to come on, and having Jonathan Colton on got Jonathan Flansburgh from They May Be Giants. Jonathan Colton is a comedy
He's a
musician.
comedy musician. Is he the guy who Glee ripped off?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes,
I remember this now. I love his R.E. Brain song. That song's so funny.
Yes.
Okay, so you got Jonathan Colton on.
Jonathan Colton, and that led me to John Flansburgh from They May Be Giants, because Colton and Flansburgh were friends, so I could tell Flansburgh, hey, Colton did this, so you should do it. And then Flansburgh did it, and that helped to get Josh Malina to say, so look, I had the guy from the They May Be Giants. And so we had Governor Jesse Ventura on at one point. Had the lead singer of Harvey Danger, whose name is not Harvey Danger. I can't think of what his name is right now. The guy who sang...
Flagpole Sitta.
But so we got, and they would just not talk about the things that they were famous for, which was really interesting. Jesse Ventura was a bad guest. It was a bad episode. He ranted about conspiracy theories about elections, and it was very bizarre.
Oh, so this is post Governor Ventura.
Yes.
Okay.
But I loved doing that show, and eventually I felt like it had run its course. But the story of how I got to do what I'm doing now is we were on a then fledgling, now dead podcast network called Mule Radio.
Okay.
And a couple weeks into doing Unprofessional, Mule sent us a Squarespace ad to read. And I said, why? And they said, well, this is the way we can pay you. I was like, oh, I thought we were just doing it for fun. Like, truly had not thought that I was going to get paid for it. Didn't think I was a big enough deal. But so they sent an ad the next week, they sent an ad the next week, and then no ad the 4th time. And I was like, hey, guys, now that you've been paying us a couple $100 a week to do the show, it's way less interesting to do it and not get paid. Do you mind if I try to sell ads? And they said, go for it. I had absolutely no ad sales experience of any kind. And so I just contacted friends who made apps. And I was like, hey, do you want to advertise your app on my podcast? And I had some friends say yes. Then I started cold emailing people who I found in the App Store. I would just browse the App Store and hit the Contact Us link and find their websites and write to them. And quickly realized I was pretty good at selling ads. My subject line for all those emails at the time was an unprofessional opportunity for your brand name, or an unprofessional opportunity for you. And people didn't know what that meant. And for me, it was like a joke because unprofessional was the name of the show, but it sounded like an interesting thing, and people would open the email and read it. And so then another friend on the network said, hey, will you sell my show too? And then eventually the network was like, if you're going to sell 2 of our 12 shows, why don't you sell all 12 of the shows, which included that one show, the talk show that was my introduction to podcasting, really, which was at that time, especially a fairly sizable show. And so now I was suddenly selling ads 3 months later after selling one podcast ad. I was selling ads for 12 shows. And then I put a little website together, and friends with other podcasts outside that network said, will you sell our shows too? And then strangers started reaching out. So Max Linsky from Longform, now of Pineapple, reached out to me. I still have that email from like 2012 or something. I repped Boing Boing. I did a show called Accidental Tech Podcast, which was and is now still a big tech show. And so 3 or so months after I sold my first podcast ad, I was repping close to 50 shows.
Wow.
And I had no idea what I was doing. I was reinventing ad sales, like stuff that's so obvious. It wasn't quite this bad. It was basically as bad as, hey, I have an idea. I could tell somebody if they buy multiple spots that they can pay a little bit less per spot in exchange for buying like 101 stuff, but I had to learn all of it.
Oh, wow. So you almost like the naturally stumbled upon the like business side of the creative side of what you were doing,
exactly.
Which so many creative people I feel like struggle with. I definitely know I do. Like I wouldn't know how to monetize my even begin to monetize my show other than get people to listen to it.
Right.
Wow, that's interesting. And then how did you? And so you're doing all this on your own.
I'm doing it nights and weekends because I still have a full-time day job writing for Macworld. And after about a year, I'm like, I had sold $500,000 worth of ads, and I was keeping like 10%. So it was not chump change, but it was a big deal to do that much volume.
Right.
And I was like, I either have to stop doing this or do it full time. And I was not confident enough to do it full time because I had never been a salesperson. I didn't like the idea of like my family will earn income if I sell ads, but not if I don't. Because it was still like, I didn't know who was going to say yes.
Yeah.
I remember the first, I eventually paid for a LinkedIn membership early on that first year. And I was like, I'm going to pay for this. And it's a big expense. It was like $1,000+.
Yeah.
And this way I can write to more advertisers who I can't reach. Because that was the number one way I was finding them at that point. And I emailed a person my first day with the membership at 23andMe. I still remember her name. And she wrote back, an unprofessional opportunity, and she wrote back a day or two later. And she was like, yeah, I would try this. Is $10,000 a big enough test budget? And I was like, $10,000 test budget. That's bigger than any individual sale I've ever done. I was like, yes, I suppose in this case for 23andMe, I can allow a $10,000 test budget. But what eventually happened was there was an article in The Verge about 30 podcasts you should be listening to. And about 10 of them were shows that I repped. And then another 8 of them were Earwolf. And I had not heard of Earwolf. I didn't know about the comedy podcasting space at the time.
Right.
And so I cold emailed the Earwolf contact form. I had heard about the guy from Earwolf, but hadn't put it all together. I heard about Jeff, the founder.
Right.
And so I wrote through the contact form that was for advertisers, like, hey, I do this too. We should talk. And Jeff was like, I keep hearing about you too. We should talk. And so we talked, and I ended up here.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
It took a couple months of figuring things out.
That's incredible. And I will say this before, and again, it's not just because I work here. I feel like, and I said this when I was on the Wolf Den, I feel like you and this company kind of at least have the best sense of where podcasting is and where it's going. And as far as like just the business side of keeping this a viable medium and it not like fading off to like some weird novelty like vlogs or something to that effect, I think is amazing, because I love podcasts. So just the fact that it's my career now is incredible. So a couple of things I want to ask. First off, when did you start doing the Wolf Den?
That's a really good question. It was after Adam Sachs left. So Adam Sachs left mid-roll, I guess 2.5 years ago, because we were acquired 3.5 years ago, almost 4. So about 3 years ago, 2.5 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
When he left, he was our former CEO. When he left, Chris Bannon and I took over the Wolf Den.
Okay. And did you have did you know as much as you did now? What are some of the most surprising things you've learned about either like the podcasting industry or production related from doing the Wolf Den?
I'll tell you the truth. People? For years, I felt like I'm a podcasting expert of some sort or another, because I've been in this industry a long time. Like on the monetization side, I think I'm one of the people who helped build it out. And there's not a lot of things that I talk, vainly about myself on. I'm sure there's anybody who's listening who's like, oh, there's plenty of things, but there's not many other things. But like that, I felt like I was a good person to be able to speak about the industry because I was part of the team that built it.
Yeah.
I think that what the Wolf Den has done for me really is made me a better interviewer, because it's a skill, right? You have to, there's the set of like, I have my written questions ahead of time and I'm going to ask them no matter what. And then there's the set of, these are the things I want to be able to, like Harry, who produces it now, and Paul Reesmandel, who used to produce it, Harry Nelson produces it now, gives me a sheet of prep or a couple of sheets of prep. And there are questions in there. There's ways to guide the conversation. And I want to read it and know it ahead of time, but then I want to be active and present and follow the conversation and ask the right questions, not just what am I thinking to ask next? Chris and I did it together for a while, Chris Bannon, our chief content officer. And eventually Chris asked if he could stop being on. He's like, I think that it'd be better without me. And I didn't know if I agree with him. I still don't know if I agree with him. But the one thing that it really did was it made me have to listen even more. Because when there's a co-host, you can always say, well, if I don't have a follow-up question, the co-host will. Or I can think of a joke while he's thinking of and he's really paying attention. And so instead of that, I now have to be super present the whole time and pay a lot of attention. And you can see even as we're doing this, my phone is buzzed approximately 500,000 times. And I'm trying to take it. I'm trying to ignore my phone as much as possible, but there is so much happening that I can't. So anyway, when I'm doing the Wolf Den, I have to try to avoid that distraction too, which is always hard. And so I think from that side, it's helped. I just also love using our studios here in this office because when I do other podcasts at home. I do a show about fatherhood called Turning This Car Around, and I do a show about technology called The Rebound. And those are often like a USB mic at home and on my computer and just shutting the doors. And so doing it in a more fanciful or professional setup just adds a level of not gravitas, but just of professionalism to what's happening that I find benefits the show.
Oh yeah, I understand completely. Like the getting to sit behind the Earwolf in the studio, getting to sit behind the big like SM 357 or whatever it's called, and seeing oh, that's my friend Lane Moore. She signed the table. It's it kind of feels like even just recording on my portable stuff in this really nice studio space. I feel like there's a certain level aura that comes from recording in a place like this.
Yes.
Awesome. So we're going to get your late night comedy thing podcast started. And I also want to say thank you so much for those. And then just one more thing, and then we'll close it out here.
Just really quick before I forget, my introduction to Ben Schwartz, before I knew him as a frequent Earwolf collaborator and all the other things that he's done, was him having a similar conceit, although he sometimes gets jokes on two late night shows, but his Twitter handle is rejected jokes because he would share initially his point on social was sharing jokes that Seth Meyers wouldn't do or that Weekend Update wouldn't do that he had pitched. And I was like, oh, I want to be that guy. I want to be so good that I can have the rejected jokes that I'm still willing to share because they've taken some of my other jokes.
Yeah. I wish that too. So I also want to say thank you for those Weird Al shows because if you're listening to this and you don't know every show of Weird Al's ridiculously self-indulgent tour, you can listen to if you subscribe to Stitcher Premium, because I was really sick when he was playing the Apollo, so I couldn't go.
I was there.
Yeah, so those are great.
Have you listened to all 77? Probably not.
I've listened to maybe 10. I've gone to oh, what did he play in that city? Right. Oh, what did he play in that city?
I mean, that project was a dream come true for me. I'm on Al's Christmas card list now, but I really. It was the first time, as you know, as an Al fan, I'm guessing, it was the first time that he was not doing the same set list every single night. And on that tour in particular, he was playing almost exclusively originals, and it was for hardcore Al fans, and I felt like they would come out to Stitcher Premium too. And I was like, I'll tell you, when I started the conversation with Al and his manager, they were like, he's probably not going to do this. There's reasons to do it, but there's reasons not to do it. And I got a final no. And I said, I'm going to send one more impassioned plea. And I wrote a letter to the manager asking him to share it with Al. I had Al's contact info, but I was like, I'm going to do this the right way. I'm going to go through the proper channels.
Right.
And it was basically like, I'm a huge fan. And this is, not every fan can afford your show. Not every fan is living near where you're doing a show. And I'm a fan, and I'm going to see 2 shows that I bought my tickets for already. And I'm frustrated that I won't see the other 75 because I want to know what you're doing every single night. And I know I'm not alone. And this is ultimate fan gratification, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, okay, he'll do it. And so I felt this was my life's work, was getting this to happen. Yeah.
That's beautiful. It's just that and that personal, sincere touch to it, I think feels just so much more impactful. Because again, that is the kind of tour where it's almost like the Grateful Dead or when Pearl Jam put out all of their live shows. If the show is changing from night to night, you want to get
it's part of that
nuances.
completist thing for me, right? I want to hear it all. I want to know every single thing.
Oh yeah, same. And especially if he's playing he played covers, and then he would play 1 or 2 of the parodies, but it's mostly all of the original stuff you never get to hear.
It was all originals and then one cover song each night, and then a parody medley, the same parody medley every night.
Which was so cool to see because I've seen him once, but it was the full production with the video and the costume changes,
which is a great show. It's just a different kind of
amazing. Show. So, are you going to go to his Strings Attached tour?
I'm going to try to see the Strings Attached tour either in Philadelphia or New York.
Fantastic. The next time you talk to Weird Al, tell him Will Carey is a huge fan. He won't know who I am.
I'll make sure he knows.
Excellent. One last question I want to have, just more of a business question. Is there any kind of general business advice or knowledge that you would convey to podcasters who are trying to grow their shows or like become like full-time or professionals?
Two things. Number one, I mean, I'm positing already that it's a good show, right? You have to start from high quality, right?
Yeah.
But you have to treat your show like you have a massive audience. If you do, like, I know there's the easy self-deprecating jokes of, hey, so I want to send a message to all my listeners, so both of you pay close attention. Like, I get that.
Right.
But you want to feel like you're playing to a massive audience each time.
Yeah.
And honestly, even if your show, in quotes, has only 500 listeners, only has 5,000 listeners, whatever that number is, imagine playing to a room of that size. That's a big room.
Yeah.
That's a big group of people who are interested in what you have to say. So you got to treat it like it's big, even before it is. And then I think the second thing is not just the content quality, but just overall quality. And that to me means a lot of things. Like, you've got to have good mics. It's got to sound good. It can't be a chore to listen to. If people record, and it doesn't happen as much now, people record using their laptop's built-in microphone. It sounds like garbage, and it's a pain to listen to.
Oh, yeah. That bugs me so much.
You can see with video, right? Like, internet videos where the audio is horrible, it doesn't matter how HD the video quality is, it's unwatchable.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just about audio quality. When I'm saying quality, I'm saying like a consistent release schedule, and my show is going to come out this time, and it's going to come out every week. And if I'm taking a week off, I'm going to tell you in advance. Like, treating it professionally, I think helps with both listeners and then potential advertisers. I think the final thing I would say is, if you don't have ads yet and you want ads, put some ads in there anyway. You can sign up for an affiliate link for Audible, or sign up for an affiliate link for something, or have your own merch or whatever the hell it is. Like, even if it's a Cafe Press site, like, have some spots so that A, you're training listeners, and B, anybody who's out there who's listening to your show who could buy ads hears, oh, there could be ads in here. And there's nothing wrong with giving the contact information too, like either in the show notes or even at the end of the episode. By the way, to advertise on this show, like people won't think to do it until you prompt them.
Excellent. That was very helpful just for me personally just now. So that I got some.
We're not recording it, are we? I was just talking to you.
No, we've been recording this whole time.
Oh my God.
So much has happened. Lex, this has been great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Well, thank you for having me. I was so honored when you asked.
Excellent. And it was an honor to do the Wolf Den. So when I build my own media empire within Stitcher and Earwolf, and we'll sit down on the Wolf Den.
I'm ready.
Thank you so much, Lex.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Okay, folks, that's the show for this week. Thank you guys so much for listening. Again, if you're in the New York City area, February 11th, 15th, and 18th, me and Sam Z will be doing workshop versions of our one-man shows at Pete's Candy Store and Branded Saloon. You can check the description for that information. Those shows are free, so if you're available, I'd love to see you. Thank you again to Lex for his time and his candor, and for some really great, useful information. I felt like I learned a lot in that conversation. So thank you again, Lex. If you enjoyed this, please feel free to tell a friend. We are on Stitcher and iTunes. If you want to give us a rating, or if you want to add the show to your favorites playlist, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at ComicWillCarey, and I will be building a new version of my website this year. So I will keep you updated on that. Thank you guys again for listening, and I will see you next week between Awesome and Disaster. Take care, everybody.